Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome, SEIU Local 1 members. We are excited to be back today. My name is Ellen, and I am with the new Training and Legal Fund with SEIU Local 1. Today, or this week, we have a series of presentations that are available to you in English, Spanish, and Polish. If you need interpretation, go down at the bottom of your screen and you'll see a little globe. You can click on the globe and select Polish or Spanish. While folks might be doing that, I will say that everybody, all of our guests today will be muted and on and off camera. Thank you for joining us. We hope you find it interesting. The presentation is being recorded. Yes. And I think without further ado, and I'm sorry, questions. If you have questions or curiosities throughout the presentation, we ask that you put them in the chat. You can put them in whatever language you're comfortable in. And then if we have time at the end of the presentation, we will address what we can. And if not, the Training and Legal Fund will follow up with you via phone call to address your questions. But now to get us started, because today we are talking about family law or domestic relations. Before we get started, I do want to be clear that the Training and Legal Fund, as a new fund, currently covers 3 types of legal services: immigration, real estate, and estate planning. That being said, our members have asked for family law support, okay? While we're not right now able to financially support these services, we do want you to have information and have a list of people that you can contact if you choose to consult with them. So the fund can, if you call the fund and you're a member, we can provide a list of contact information for you to have an attorney. We have attorneys in English, Spanish, Polish, and a variety of languages. Today, to kick off the information session, we have with us our attorney today is Jessica Bell of Bell Advocate. Jessica is local to Chicago. She's been a proud South Side community member of Chicago and an attorney since 2017. She's recently decided to focus her practice in domestic relations, estate planning, probate, and guardianship. So she has a lot of work to do. Prior to this, she was also doing ethics decision in law. And so we're really excited to have Jessica here. Not only does she bring a wealth of legal information, but I will just say she's an active volunteer and community member in and around Chicago. And we're excited to have her. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to share my screen and we'll turn it over to Jessica.
Hello, while the screen is being shared, again, I am Jessica Bell. I am a solo practitioner, which means I am an attorney who works for themselves, and I do practice domestic relations. And so, one of the first things that we're going to talk about is what does that even mean? What is domestic relations? And I'm not going to just read from the slides that we have prepared. And so we're not missing anything. So let's talk about what it means. Domestic relations is a very broad category that the court uses to define anything that deals with children and the parentage of those children or divorces. And I want to be very specific about what it doesn't include. Let's say that you never got married to your partner, but you all own a house together. That's not something that the domestic relations court can deal with because it doesn't fall under that marriage or children category. If you wanted to deal with the selling of the house or who is responsible for a foreclosure, a mortgage, or something like that, you would have to go to a different division in our court system, like Chancery. It also doesn't cover what we call guardianship, which is something that I also practice, but does not fall under domestic relations. So that would be something like um, if you are taking care of your niece or nephew because their parents can't do it, or you're taking care of a family member that's disabled. Perhaps your mother has dementia or your brother has cerebral palsy and you're taking care of them. Those types of things are guardianship cases. So those don't fall under domestic relations. So now let's talk about what does. A domestic relations case is a dissolution of a marriage, a civil union, or a legal separation. Um, it also includes the invalidity of a marriage. And I'm going to go over what these are in a little bit more depth later. But declaring a marriage to be invalid, that also falls under domestic relations. In certain cases, orders of protection will also be included underneath. There is a separate domestic violence court. But if the person you're getting an order of protection against is a spouse or is the parent of your child, you can have those two cases connected. So let's say you had a divorce case going over here, and then in the middle of it, you found a need to file for an order of protection. What you would do is you would tell that court that there is a pending divorce, and then that would allow for those cases to be linked. Okay. What else? It's parentage, or what we would call DNA testing. So if you and the father, again, were not in a marriage, he didn't sign the birth certificate, and you need to move forward with having a DNA test done or him declared the father, that falls under domestic relations. And then any type of responsibility for those children. So we don't actually use the word custody legally anymore, but I'm going to use it here because we know what that means. In the law, it's called an allocation of parental responsibilities or parenting time. That falls under domestic relations. And so who's going to make the decisions about the child, medical or where they go to school? And then also, how much time are they going to spend with each parent? That falls under domestic relations. And then finally, child support. Or not finally, child support falls under domestic relations. And the actual finally is third party visitation, which is a little complicated, but it's essentially a grandparents' rights, a type of case. So if you're a grandparent and you want to see your grandchild and you're not being allowed to see your grandchild, that is something that you could also petition for in domestic relations. Um, so the court covers all of those categories, and then anything in the future that deals with those categories. So if you guys have an existing agreement and you need to come back to court to enforce it, or you need to come back to court to change it, you wouldn't do a different, regular lawsuit or something. You come back to use the same case number, the same court to deal with any modification or enforcement of those issues as well.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Before we move on, Jessica, are you seeing the actual slide or are you seeing the slideshow presentation? I just want to make sure. Are you
Right
seeing it on Zoom?
now,
Sorry?
I'm seeing the actual slide. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, great. And you can see that it just changed, right?
Yes.
Thank
Okay. So, can we make this is a common question and probably why many of you are here. We are very aware that court can cost a lot of money. It can be very stressful. It can be very time consuming. So, a common question is, can we skip all of this and just make an agreement out of court, or come to court with an agreement that we already came up with? The simple answer is yes, but that does carry its own risks. So, for a divorce, if you are married to each other, there is no legal way to get divorced without filing a court case. It doesn't mean that that court case has to be very strenuous and long, but you do have to file a court case. There must be a record that you all are getting divorced and that this has been approved by a judge, because there are certain legal things that will change in the future based on your divorce decree. Down. If you guys are generally in an agreement, and it's you don't want it to be a long drawn out process, or there's no arguments, you can approach the court almost from the very beginning and tell them, we have an agreement already on what we want to do, and we just need you all to sign off on it or check it. That is something that you're allowed to do. Um, and the what paperwork you need, there are systems in place where you can figure out exactly what documents you need, but that you cannot get divorced without a court case. Now, what if you're dealing with child issues? Yes, there are ways to deal with some of the children issues without a formal court case. One of those things is paternity. If the father didn't sign the birth certificate at the very beginning, but there's no disagreement that he's the father, or you all opt to do a DNA test independently with a separate private kit, and then you're going to move forward to have him named the father and added to the birth certificate, you can do that out of court. There is a form called a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity. It's free. You can Google it, and just download it. You don't need a lawyer for that form. It does have to be signed, it does have to be witnessed, and I believe it has to be notarized. And you can go to your bank or our Kirksey Exchange. There are lots of places that have notaries, but that is what will, if both parents sign that and then send that off to, the Secretary of State or downstate to Springfield, to the capital, then you can get something back that says, okay, we've acknowledged, you guys are acknowledging paternity, and then you could, go to the Secretary of State and update the birth certificate, things like that. But when it comes to decision making and parenting time, it gets a little bit more complicated. Um, So again, the short answer is yes, you can come to an agreement about those things and you all don't ever have to come to court. But the risk is that it is not legally enforceable. It's kind of like an outside private contract. And so let's say the agreement was for dad to pick up the child every Tuesday at 5 o'clock. And one day he just stops doing that. Even though you all have a signed agreement or there was a long term arrangement for it, there's no way for either of you to enforce that to happen without an order from the court. And so, what I find is that sometimes parents who don't want to participate in the court process will do something called mediation. And mediation is a third party. Sometimes they're a lawyer, sometimes they're a social worker. There are also just regularly people who are just trained as mediators. They don't work for either one of you. Their job is to be a neutral middle ground. And then you all both come with your issues, and their job is to try to negotiate you guys to a middle point. There are parents who come up with an agreement using that mediator, and you can potentially go your child's entire life as a minor under 18 just using that agreement. But again, that's not enforceable. So if there's something that you want that has a little bit more teeth to it, then I would recommend, or it would be necessary for you to file court. So, next slide, right? What if mediation doesn't work and you find that you have to file? Both parties can file. And in my opinion, and other lawyers may disagree, but in my opinion, there are not many benefits to being the first person to file. You all get equal rights as to what the end game is or under the law. The real difference between whether you're going to file the case or the other person is going to file the case sometimes is just the ability to set the story, to set the scene of what's happening. And also kind of, honestly kind of manage your own anxiety because you're the one who started the process. So you know what's coming about it. But either party can file the paperwork. Mom can file it, dad can file it, um, wife can file it, husband can file it. It'll be a little different, but either party can actually file the paperwork. Um, in divorce cases, what they typically ask for, or what the general rule is, the court likes to see you guys have been separated maybe 6 months or so before you file for divorce. That is not necessary, but that's kind of when the court is kind of clocked like there's no chance at reconciliation. There's no chance that you're going to get back together. So we're going to move forward with filing. Um, an issue that comes up a lot sometimes is that we're not separated, right? And that's sometimes that's just a financial issue. Neither party can afford to move out. And so you're still living together or under the same roof, but you're not functioning like a married couple. You can also file for divorce in those situations. And you can also file for, kind of child issues in those situations. Again, it is a little bit more complicated because you're still sharing expenses and still sharing responsibility for the children. But the fact that you still live together does not mean that you're not allowed to file for a divorce or file for, a formal agreement for your children. Invalidation, circling back around to that, that's very rare. And it occurs when there's something, when the marriage isn't even really legal. So maybe the person you married, it isn't even them. It was fraud, right? Different name or something like that. If they were underaged, if they were incapacitated, like they were drunk or they, something, or they had dementia, right? If your 98-year-old grandmother with dementia marries, some 50-year-old, that's something that potentially we could get the marriage invalidated for. Um, Parentage cases are, again, there's no prior agreement. That's when you're unmarried and you need to get um, either a DNA test and paternity legally recognized. And then again, that custody petition is when you're trying to define who makes this decisions and what type of time you're going to have with the child. The court cares about four major things when it comes to decision making: school, medical, religion, and extracurricular activities. So the court is going to ask whether or not mom and dad are going to make those decisions together, or if one parent is going to make the decisions, or if they're going to split them. And the court doesn't really care how you guys do it as long as it makes sense for the family and the child. So it could be that mom is a doctor and dad is a teacher. So maybe you guys decide mom will take the lead on medical decisions, dad will take the lead on school decisions, and we'll make religion and extracurricular decisions together. Whatever way you shake that up is fine as long as it makes sense for the child. The same thing with time. there are many different types of time um, arrangements you can make. The kind of one you see most often is that every other weekend, but it doesn't have to be. If your schedules are different and your off days are Tuesdays and Thursdays, you can ask for that to be the schedule, that you have the child Tuesday and Thursday night, and then maybe Sunday. So again, as long as it makes sense for the family and it doesn't hurt the child, you guys can offer any of those options in any of those ways. So let's talk about how we actually make that happen now. This slide we can do relatively quickly because it's just the who, the how, and the why. So each there are different kinds of court. So I think you guys have heard, there's the Supreme Court, there are appeals courts, and then there are just kind of like trials, what we call circuit level courts. Domestic relation cases all happen on a statewide circuit level, which means that Illinois law is what's going to rule or set the stage for what happens in your case. Now, where you file your case is dependent, and I mean like the actual courthouse or where your case is going to happen is dependent on where you are, where the other person are, or where the children are. That's kind of a jurisdiction issue. For example, it would not make any sense if both of you live in Chicago, but your case is happening at a courthouse out in Skokie or Des Plaines, right? And the same way it wouldn't make sense that if you lived in Peoria, the case is happening here. So when you're thinking about where to file your paperwork, think about that. And that's the county level. Cook County, which is where Chicago is, also includes some of the suburbs. So there is a courthouse in Skokie. There is a courthouse in Bridgeview. There's one in Markham. Um, but that is still part of the Cook County like umbrella. All of those courthouses are under Cook County. And then perhaps you just file your paperwork at Markham because you live in the south suburbs within Cook County. Um, that being said, those are kind of like those suburbs. So if you live close to Skokie or the kids live in Skokie, you can file at the Skokie courthouse under Cook County. You can file your documents online. There's a electronic filing system, so you don't physically have to go down to the courthouse to file your paperwork. You may physically have to go to your courthouse to talk to the judge. That is all kind of dependent on what courthouse and what judge. The judges sometimes get to make their own rules for their own courtroom. So whether or not you have to do Zoom like we're doing now for your case, or whether you'll have to physically go in, it really just depends on what judge, what courthouse, and what time. So if you decide to be your own attorney and not hire a lawyer, you will be responsible for going to each one of those court dates. But if you hire an attorney, it's our job to show up for you. So you would not have to appear at every court date unless specifically asked to do so. And so that's one of the perks of doing it. This is just an outline of what that's going to look like if you decide not to hire an attorney, right? So, whatever case you're doing, you're going to have to figure out your filing and submit that to the court either in person or electronically. After that, you have to tell the other person that this is happening. Court cases can't happen without notice or telling, you can't get divorced without telling the other person. You can't ask for child support without telling the other person. So you have to send them off a summons, which is just the kind of the paperwork that says, hey, I'm taking you to court. That has to be served on the person either by a sheriff or a private person you can hire. You are not typically allowed to just mail it or email it to them because there needs to be some type of record that the right person got the right paperwork. Once they receive it, they have 30 days to respond to your paperwork and tell the court that they're going to proceed. So, unless there's an emergency, even after you file, there's a little bit of a waiting game. Thereafter, you guys will be assigned a court date or a judge. There will be certain things you may have to do just depending on your case, exchange paperwork. When there are children are involved, there is a co-parenting class about communication. That all has to be done before your case can be settled unless you walk in with that agreement from the very beginning. um, if you guys aren't getting along and it starts getting, kind of dangerous. I'm not dangerous isn't the word I want. It starts getting a little hostile. You can start moving towards trial, right? And so discovery, which is number 4, you'll hear that word. It's kind of scary. It's kind of scary for lawyers as well because it's a lot. That's all of the paperwork that are answers that you're asking for other people. So if you want a copy of their pension, if you want bank statements, if you're asking about, different things, the discovery process is when that happens. And there's a formal way that you have to both request and give that information. And then if ultimately you guys can't settle this out, you're going to be set for a hearing or a trial. And that's kind of how that will all work. The Cook County court system has tried very hard to make this information available to you all, and for people who do not have lawyers. And so both the court websites and other websites are around that can help you both find the paperwork and fill it out. We can go to the next one. So, pros and cons. We've kind of already talked about it. Honestly, the biggest pro about hiring an attorney is that they already know what's going on and they know the procedure. It's interesting that you have interpreters here because I actually often describe lawyers as interpreters and translators, right? It is my job to take the mush that is legalese and law and translate that back to everyday language for my client. And then take what my client is telling me they want or desire and put that into legalese for the judge. That's my job. And then also dealing with the paperwork and showing up to court so that you can go to work instead. And showing up to court is my work, my job. So that's the pro. The con is that there is a third party in your business, and maybe you don't want that. It can be expensive. It can be a lengthy process. And then sometimes, unfortunately, the lawyers can sometimes like make it more complicated or worse um, if you guys are not aligned or communicating well about what it is that you need. Um, would I lean towards getting an attorney? Yes. But that does not mean that you have to go full on. And that's kind of the purpose of this slide. So, what different types of legal representation could you get? If you all are truly, truly aligned, there is a very narrow window for what's called joint representation, which means you and the other person could hire the same lawyer and share that cost. And you're just kind of hiring that lawyer to get the paperwork done and get the process in. That requires perfect unity in opinion and what you guys want. Because if at any point in time you guys start splitting on what you want to happen, that lawyer has to bow out. That's part of the ethical part. You are not allowed, a lawyer is not allowed to represent two different people if they're butting heads, because that means I can't fully service either one of you. So I've got to go. There's also something called limited scope representation, which means you can hire some attorneys offer their services and what we sometimes call unbundled or like a la carte, which means maybe you don't have the money to hire a lawyer to do the whole thing beginning to end. Or maybe you feel comfortable kind of doing the initial paperwork and negotiation yourself. But later on, you feel like, okay, this is getting complicated. I don't know how to do that discovery I talked about before, that exchange of paperwork. You could hire a lawyer just to do that part or just to come to trial. Or maybe you can figure out you're getting divorced and you guys can figure out the family issues, but the like pension or the money issues, the house is more complicated. You could hire them just to deal with that. And that sometimes saves some money. There is a lawyer that can be hired just for the child. So sometimes people choose to do that. And so they don't get a lawyer for themselves, but they ask the court to assign what we call a guardian ad litem or a child's representative. Um, in certain circumstances, those can be assigned for free. That's rare. But the court, there's also a list of attorneys that are qualified to do it, private attorneys. And then there are also government attorneys that could represent the child. So sometimes, if money, again, is an issue, you guys can hire an attorney for the child, but represent yourselves. And if you do that, it's very important that you understand that even though you're paying that attorney does not work for you and does not have to do what you say. Their job is to represent the best interest of the child. So the risk you take there is that you may pay for a guardian ad litem or a child's representative that doesn't agree with what you want. And so that's a risk there. And then, of course, there's full representation. You can just hire a lawyer.
Hey, Jessica, we're almost at time, so I'm going to move us along to the next slide if that's all right. And we'll move through this a little bit quicker if that's all right.
Yes,
Thank
because then this is just a continuation. We are actually almost done. Um, these are just some of the factors of why it can be very complicated. And your divorce or your child issues may seem simple at the beginning. It is very easy for cases to take a hard left or a hard right. The length of the marriage can change whether or not you're allowed to ask for alimony. How many children are involved? Is there blended family aspect? Do you guys live in different counties or different cities? Do you live in different states? What are the work schedules, right? Do you work a night shift? And so it's going to be hard for you to have overnights, right? Do you travel for work? Are you self-employed? That's a big one when you're getting divorced, because how do you calculate the money and what their income really is? So all of those things are reasons why people choose to hire attorneys. And also maybe a reason for you to move forward with that limited scope representation, right? Because everything else was pretty simple, but you get to one of these issues and it kind of blows up the agreement. Okay. So, final takeaways. Can you do a family law domestic relations issue without a lawyer? Absolutely. In Illinois, you are not required to have an attorney for a family law case. You can do all of it, including trial, by yourself. But it is important to know that if you do that, you are tied to the very same rules that a lawyer is tied to. So if you're given 14 days to do something, your response to the court can't be, I'm not a lawyer, I don't understand the law, the paperwork was confusing, we are held to the same standards, whether you are a lawyer or not, if you choose to represent yourself in court. Um, on the slide is the list of all of the places where those laws and rules can be found. Again, the umbrella is the state law, but there are different rules that are put in place as you get more specific, right? So the state has rules, Cook County has rules, your circuit court has rules, and then, of course, your individual judge has their own rules, right? I have a judge who only wants things faxed. They do not accept emails. And that's just something we have to deal with because the judge makes their rules for their courtroom. So, whatever scale, whether it's full representation, limited scope, maybe even just a consultation, um, is something that I would recommend you all consider when dealing with your family law issues.
Jessica, that was awesome. You really broke down a really complex type of law into a lot of accessible information. So thank you. Again, like we said in the beginning, there are lawyers that we can provide their contact information if people are looking for the limited scope or the short-term agreements or even full representation. Right now, however, the fund is not, because of the complexity, because of the amount of time it takes right now, and we're a new fund. Right now, we are not covering family law services. We appreciate Jessica's time and her expertise.
One quick thing I wanted to add. The court, Cook County does provide translators in court for free. And so I just wanted to note that if you do decide to be your own lawyer, but language is still an issue, you can request a Spanish or a Polish or another interpreter. Spanish and Polish is pretty easy for them to find. If there's a different language, it does help to contact the court before your court date so that they can track down somebody who can come and interpret. But the court does provide interpreters.
Really helpful. Thank you. So if you're interested in connecting with a lawyer, even Jessica, the number to call is 312-233-8794. Again, this is the training and legal fund at SEIU Local 1. It's 312-233-8794. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and say thank you, everybody, for showing up. Thank you, Jessica, for this information and your time and bringing it to us. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you.